COVID-19 once again dominated the headlines in the first few months of 2022. But as the year went on, the focus turned to the provincial election and then the municipal vote. There was also a record number of homicides this past year and a lot of turmoil within the Thunder Bay Police Force. Stay with us as over the next hour we recap the top stories of 2022. I'm Riley McManus, and thanks for joining us here for TBT News Year in Review. January began with yet another province-wide lockdown due to the alarming spread of the Omicron variant. But things started to open up again later in the month.
Just over 2 weeks after Ontario imposed restrictions for a host of indoor settings to quell the rise of the Omicron variant, the Ford government is easing those restrictions at the end of January. But is now the right time to reverse course? Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Janet DeMille, warns that loosening restrictions can lead to higher transmission if people aren't cautious. But she also sees the importance of some return to normalcy.
So it's really finding the right balance between having the measures in place, to protect people and places, while at the same time, still looking at how do we allow people and open up a little bit more so that people can do the things that are really meaningful to them.
This week has also seen the return to in-person learning for schools across the province, a decision that caused DeMille some concern initially. But so far, she has been impressed with the added measures schools have taken locally to protect both students and staff.
The deputy chief of the Thunder Bay Police Service was suspended in late January due to an internal investigation.
Inspector Ryan Hughes was promoted to deputy chief in August of 2019. The Police Services Board is in charge of hiring the chief and deputy chief, and the board chose Hughes to serve as Chief Sylvie Hoth's right hand. Now, just over 2 years later, Hughes is under suspension with pay. Board officials declined interviews, but released a statement saying the board can confirm that Deputy Chief Ryan Hughes has been suspended pending an internal investigation. The board cannot comment further at this time, as this is a human resources matter and await the outcomes of the investigation. The move comes as the police force leadership and the board have become the subject of numerous human rights complaints and public criticism from the president of the Police Association. There's no word on whether those complaints and the suspension are connected.
Near the end of January, the so-called Freedom Convoy made a stop in Thunder Bay on its controversial journey to Ottawa.
After being welcomed by hundreds of supporters in places like Kekabeka Falls and other parts of the region, the majority of the Freedom Convoy, made up of hundreds of transport trucks and personal vehicles, spent the night at the local dirt track speedway. The caravan departed Thunder Bay early in the morning with OPP stationed along their departure route to ensure traffic continued to flow safely. OPP Sergeant Mike Golding notes it was a tall order when dealing with such a large line of vehicles, but he was pleased with how everything went.
Our intention was to, keep the local traffic moving as quickly and regularly as possible. So we did utilize the traffic lights. We think that was just a fair way to deal with it, and also allow the group to catch up with itself, so they don't get stretched, to a point where there's a very large distance and gap between them. But it appears to me that it was quite orderly, and we're very happy with the way it turned out.
Aside from a small number of agitators that were aggressive towards news reporters on scene Wednesday night, referring to them as communists, the majority of the convoy have traveled peacefully on the stretch between Kenora and Thunder Bay.
In late January and early February, the Scotties Tournament of Hearts finally came to Fort William Gardens, a year later than planned due to the pandemic. Spectator limits forced most people to watch it on TV, but the event was still being called a success.
Local organizers were ecstatic with how it all played out. Of course, they would also have liked to have had 4,000 fans packed into the Fort William Gardens, but the 400 volunteers, junior curlers, and players' families helped bring some of that excitement to the playoff rounds. Emery says Curling Canada officials have indicated Thunder Bay would be a front-runner to host the event in 3 years, especially with the ticket sales being so strong before the pandemic got in the way. Despite the lack of fans, the 3 local curling clubs still managed to split $45,000 from the online 50-50 draws. Those clubs would need to get behind another bid, and organizers would also need to secure enough volunteers. But Emery says everyone she's spoken to is anxious to bring the Scotties back.
They are looking forward, hopefully, to coming back. to have a full-fledged Scotties here in Thunder Bay, because as I say, this was our dress rehearsal, and we passed with flying colors. They're very happy, and the fans were great, and we're looking forward to being able to have them come back.
The Finnish Labour Temple was torn down in February as the first step towards rebuilding the historic city landmark.
The scorched exterior of the Finnish Labour Temple is now no longer the view from Bay Street. The iconic building has been demolished 2 months after the blaze that gutted the majority of the 110-year-old structure. Property owner Brad McKinnon is well aware of the significance of the building, but knows this will lead to better days ahead.
For the building to, to today be finally torn down is it's upsetting, but it's necessary. We understand that that's necessary. It's something that we have to do to move forward, and it's the next step in a long journey to rebuild the Finnish Labour Temple.
And a long journey it will be. McKinnon's condos were just months away from being available to the public. Now it will take upwards of 3 years for the building to welcome occupants, and between $18 and $25 million.
At the end of February, people in Thunder Bay rallied against the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
A crowd of about 200 Thunder Bay residents showed up to City Hall on Saturday in support and solidarity for the people of Ukraine. Ralliers could be seen waving the Ukrainian flag and holding up blue and yellow signs. Emotions were definitely high as all who attended the demonstration expressed their disgust over the attack on Ukraine. Rally organizer and president of Thunder Bay's League of Ukrainian Canadians, Walter Warwoda, was overwhelmed by the amount of supporters and says that it's a tough time for Ukrainians.
Who would ever believe that in 2022 we'd be fighting a conventional war that against an innocent nation, one striving for democracy? So one has to realize that this is a battle for Europe, for democracies abroad. It's larger than this.
The month of March saw a long-awaited announcement as the Ford government confirmed the creation of dozens of new detox beds in the Thunder Bay area.
What that means is that we will be providing 34 new treatment beds in Thunder Bay.
The bulk of the $3.8 million of funding will go to Daliko Anishinaabeg Family Care to create 20 supportive treatment beds. Fort William First Nation Chief Peter Collins has a personal connection to the issue. He spoke about the need in his community for a continuum of care, including post-detox aftercare and the importance of having beds available immediately when someone seeks help.
My nephew, who recently lost his life in the city, he wanted a detox. He was ready for a treatment program, but there was no beds open for him, and we lost him. He lost ended up losing his life.
St. Joseph's Care Group is part of a coalition of 6 agencies who will be receiving $1.1 million of this funding.
The start of spring saw the biggest snowstorm of the year arrive in Thunder Bay on March 23rd, causing headaches around the city.
Just when we thought it was safe to pack the snow shovels away, Old Man Winter arrived overnight and bombarded the Thunder Bay area with 30 to 50 centimeters of the white stuff, making for dangerous road conditions across the city, with commuters battling frozen, slushy roads, if they were lucky enough to even manage to get out of their driveway. Acting Roads Division Manager Ian Spoljerich described the situation.
It's wet, it's heavy, it's blowing, so definitely causing some issues for motorists and pedestrians on the sidewalks.
And it wasn't just small cars having issues getting around, as even this city snowplow got stuck trying to remove the snow in the South Nebing area. It was the same story for this city transit bus, which was stuck on Red River Road for several hours, and several transit routes were delayed or canceled.
The province's mask mandate came to an end in late March. Some people opposed the move, but there was a mainly positive reaction at local schools.
Despite the removal of mask rules in indoor settings, around 50% of the student body at St. Ignatius High School are still wearing masks. A good chunk of them only wearing masks in higher populated areas like hallways, and then taking them off once they get into class. Principal Brian McWhirter says the response towards the mask mandate being lifted has been positive amongst the student body, and he says all students are being respectful of each other's choices to wear or not wear a mask.
It's nice to see faces again and smiles, and some of these students, we really haven't seen them without a mask, so it's nice to see them without a mask, and our job obviously is to make sure that everyone's being respectful people who choose to wear a mask and those who choose not to.
The students at the high school say they feel a sense of freedom after the removal of masks, and instead of dividing them, it has brought the school closer as a community.
I think that everyone has so far respected everyone else's decision on whether to wear one or not wear one. Personally, I think it's awesome because I get to see everyone's beautiful face and all that kind of stuff, and it's also a huge step towards normalcy.
The turmoil on the Thunder Bay Police Board reached the breaking point in April. That story and more coming up as TBT News Year in Review continues. Welcome back to TBT News Year in Review. The month of April saw the main runway at the city airport close for construction, forcing airlines to adjust their plans here.
The closure of its primary runway will make the Thunder Bay Airport temporarily unavailable to jet airplanes. Local service from most airlines will continue and even increase, with propeller aircraft which can operate on the airport's shorter secondary runway. But for Flair airline flights, their fleet of jet aircraft won't be able to safely land here, so their Thunder Bay route will be halted for about 6 months.
Flair, unfortunately, will not be here for the summer. They're very keen on the Thunder Bay market. They were very pleased with how the Thunder Bay market responded to their product, and we'll be back as soon as the primary runway is restored.
On April 22nd, the Thunder Bay Police Board saw 3 of its 5 members resign after their powers were handed to an outside administrator.
The Thunder Bay Police Service Board is now down to just 1 of its previous 5 sitting members. Chair Kristen Oliver and members Michael Power and Royden Pelche have resigned from their roles. Oliver says the group decision came as a result of Tuesday's announcement that Malcolm Mercer had been appointed as administrator, holding the only voting power for the board.
It's obviously neutered us. We don't have a right to vote. Our participation is really limited now. And so with that in mind, I think the decision was made to, on my part, it was, I feel that I could benefit this community in other ways.
Board member Georgianne Morisseau had accused board officials of harassment and discrimination. She's currently on a personal leave, meaning Mayor Bill Morrow is the only sitting member of the board. Like the now resigned members, he does not agree with the appointment of an administrator, but Morrow says he wants to ensure that his voice is heard by Mercer, though he does not know if he will stay on until the end of his term.
That same day, 50-year-old David Huey and 30-year-old Musab Saboon were both found guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping following an 8-day trial in March. The victim, Lee Kyoto, was shot in the head on Mission Island in 2019. The Crown argued that Kyoto was killed over a drug debt. The trial included video surveillance from a local bowling alley that showed Saboon confronting Kyoto before leading him outside to a waiting car. Justice Daniel Newton, in delivering his verdict, said the killing was not done on a sudden impulse. Crown attorney John LaLuke said the testimony from key witness Marshall Hardy Fox helped his team win the case.
It was involved and had very many complicated issues, not the least of which was the reliance on one particular witness, which the judge found was credible. And with that, there was a successful conviction on first-degree murder. I do have to extend my thanks to both Rob Kozak and Bruce Sosa, the Crown's involved. They worked hard and they put in an incredible amount of effort to get a successful prosecution.
Saboon was sentenced in June, and Huey received his punishment in July. Both men were given automatic life sentences with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. Also in April, the province signed a $1.2 billion deal with Ellis Don Corporation to design, build, and maintain the new state-of-the-art Thunder Bay Correctional Complex on Highway 61. Foundation work on the 345-bed facility began in the summer. The new prison will replace the outdated district jail, which was built in 1926, and the Thunder Bay Correctional Center built in 1965. The big project will be attached to the 50-bed expansion project currently underway on Highway 61, bringing the total inmate capacity to 395. The union presidents at the 2 current facilities say the new complex will benefit both correctional workers and inmates.
So getting some work, some construction started later this summer to early fall is going to be a real good feeling for the correctional center and for the jail staff.
more lighting, natural lighting, big windows. It's going to be, like I said, again, night and day coming from the dungeon that basically the jail is right now. It's the exact opposite of, and it's a big step in the right direction for the future corrections here.
Longtime MPP Michael Gravel delivered some sad news on April 25th that he had to withdraw from the June election due to his cancer diagnosis.
It was an emotional day for Michael Gravel. After serving 7 terms as an MPP, including over a decade in cabinet, Gravel will not be running again this June. Upon learning that his lymphoma had returned, he knew a decision needed to be made quickly.
Pushed off as far as I could, to tell you the honest truth, because I very much wanted to run, and that was my intention. So that's why it was a very difficult decision to make, but it became clear to me that what with the side effects of the chemotherapy and the challenges I was having from a healthcare point of view, that I really would have a difficult time running an effective campaign.
The month of May began with some shocking news as a historic James Whalen tug sunk into the Cam River.
Local residents of all ages have been coming out to see the James Whalen submersed. After last year's near sinking, the mayor wasn't the only person wondering how this happened again. Corey Halverson, the city's manager of parks and open spaces, explains that the pump that was installed last year to clear water from the boat had to be removed to avoid freezing over the winter and had yet to be reinstalled, as the last time they'd checked, it was still too cold. And there was no indication of a problem as recently as last Friday.
Oh, in hindsight, yes, I always think of many things that you could have done. So obviously this is not the result we wanted. We put a lot of time and thought and effort into this last year to avoid this very thing happening.
And the bad news for city officials continued a few days later when a sinkhole emerged on River Street. All 4 lanes had to be closed for what turned out to be the rest of the year and into 2023. Contractor Norm Nadine said they needed to dig down between 30 and 35 feet just to find the source of the problem.
At this time, we're thinking there's probably a hole in the culvert and it's sucking in a lot of this dirt and causing this void. So somehow we have to try to get down to that elevation and see what we're going to do to fix it. The big challenge is obviously the runoff, right? I mean, this river is raging right now, so we have to figure a way to get down there safely. So as far as the time frame goes, until we actually know what the problem is, we can't even guess at that.
One bit of positive news for the city in May was the arrival of the Viking Octantis. The luxury cruise ship made a total of 7 stops here this summer. The brand new vessel carries 370 passengers and 260 crew members on its 8-day journey from Milwaukee. It passed by the Sleeping Giant on its way towards the breakwall and then the Pool 6 dock. Thunder Bay is a turnaround stop, with supplies loaded and new passengers coming on board for the trip back to Milwaukee. Local tourism officials said the cruise visits would bring millions of dollars of economic benefits to the city this summer. Thunder Bay saw a rash of murders in May, starting with a shooting on Hodder Avenue. A 29-year-old Thunder Bay man was found dead, and 4 young suspects were eventually arrested. 2 weeks later, a 41-year-old city man was shot dead on Pearl Street, and a 44-year-old woman was charged with first-degree murder. Then, on May 23rd on Balmoral Street, a 30-year-old man was found dead. 2 men were eventually arrested and charged with second-degree murder.
Anytime there is a homicide in this community, it's of concern, particularly when there are 3 in such short order. At this point, the investigations do not indicate that any of these homicides are connected.
The month of June would see 4 more murders around the city, and local voters went to polls in early June for the provincial election. We'll have those stories and more as TBT News Year in Review continues. Welcome back. The provincial election was held on June 2nd, and voters in the 2 Thunder Bay ridings elected brand new MPPs.
Kevin Holland was the big winner in Thunder Bay Atikokan in his first attempt at provincial politics. The longtime mayor of Conmee earned over 9,600 votes, soaring to a 900-vote victory over incumbent Judith Monteith Farrell of the NDP. Liberal Rob Barrett came third with nearly 6,500 votes. This marks the first time since the late Mickey Hennessy won in 1985 that a progressive conservative managed to beat the Liberals and the NDP in that area.
We've made history here tonight, so that's pretty exciting for me. I'm humbled by the trust that the people in Thunder Bay Atikokan have given me to represent them at Queen's Park. I'm excited for the opportunities that we have, and I'm thrilled to be able to go down and do the work that needs to be done for Thunder Bay Atikokan.
On the opposite end of the emotional spectrum was Monteith Farrell.
I'm disappointed for myself personally, but very much more for the people in our region.
The single-term MPP garnered 3,000 fewer votes than in 2018. She believes many voters were turned off by the federal alignment of the NDP and Liberals, which helped switch votes to the PCs.
Meanwhile, in Thunder Bay Superior North, the NDP won that riding for the first time in 32 years.
After losing by just 800 votes to Michael Gravel in 2018, this time around it was an 800-vote victory for NDP candidate Lise Vaugeois in Thunder Bay Superior North. It was a close race throughout the night, but Vaugeois managed to hold the lead, finishing with over 8,400 votes. PC candidate Peng Yu came in a solid second place, followed by his city council colleague Shelby Chung for the Liberals. For Vaugeois, it was a sweet victory after coming so close 4 years ago.
I feel very excited, and I think by tomorrow it'll start to sink in and I'll have to figure out what this actually means. Certainly changes my life, but it's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I feel like I bring skills that I hope will be helpful to the people in our region.
2 Thunder Bay police officers faced a misconduct hearing in early June. Sean Harrison and Sean Whipple were charged with neglect of duty and discreditable conduct.
Day 6 of the proceedings saw Staff Sergeant Sean Harrison complete his time on the stand that began Monday. Harrison has already pleaded guilty to a neglect of duty charge, admitting his failure to meet with private investigator David Perry, who had information on the case. During cross-examination, Harrison continued to deny racial bias played any role in DeBungy's death investigation, but did say he noticed mostly people from the Indigenous community falling in rivers in Thunder Bay during his career. Detective Sean Whipple, who has pleaded not guilty to both charges, also took the stand on Tuesday. During his testimony, he stressed that he was not the primary officer on the DeBungy investigation and had other cases ongoing at the same time.
Whipple ended up being found not guilty, while Harrison was found guilty on both counts. He'll learn his punishment sometime in the new year. Meanwhile, city police investigated 4 more murders in June. A 20-year-old man was killed on Shipley Street, but no one has been arrested in the case. A 34-year-old man died from a beating on May Street, and a 22-year-old man from Southern Ontario was charged in the homicide. A 28-year-old man was found dead on Miles Street, and a 24-year-old was arrested on murder charges. And a 19-year-old man was killed on Crown Street. City police charged an 18-year-old man with murder. While all this was going on, Police Chief Sylvie Hoth was hit with Police Act charges, and she was suspended on June 28th.
The Police Services Board meeting entered closed session not long after it began to consider the future of Police Chief Sylvie Hoth. It was announced last week that Hoth would be retiring next June. Then later that same day, the OCPC announced that she is facing 3 counts of misconduct under the Police Act. Hoth did not attend this meeting, with board officials explaining that she had taken a leave from her duties. Acting Deputy Chief Dan Taddeo was given the new role of Acting Chief. Board Administrator Malcolm Mercer says there was a closed-door discussion about a possible suspension of Hoth, but could not provide a timeline.
You'll hear what we decide to do when we think it appropriate to tell you.
Then late in the afternoon, a media release from the board confirmed that Hoth was suspended as a result of the serious allegations brought forward by the OCPC.
The month of July began with a tragic accident in which a Thunder Bay woman died after being swept over Wolf River Falls near Dorian.
Nipissing OPP were called about 2 people being swept down the rapids on the Wolf River and plummeting over the falls. When officers arrived on scene, they found 1 person unharmed at the top of the falls and 2 victims at the bottom. 25-year-old Pooja V.S. of Thunder Bay was pronounced dead on scene, while the other person was airlifted to hospital by Orange Air Ambulance with life-threatening injuries. Staff Sergeant David Moskal explains how this tragic incident unfolded.
Our understanding is that one of the individuals was operating a drone, and the drone had landed in the trees. They were trying to retrieve that drone and had formed kind of a daisy chain to get across the river. I presume that they underestimated the speed of the river and weren't able to successfully navigate that stretch of water.
In late July, local residents reacted to the historic apology from Pope Francis for the Catholic Church's role in Canada's residential schools.
Again, asking forgiveness, of telling you once more that I am deeply sorry.
Pope Francis's apology has been much anticipated by Indigenous people from all across Canada for decades. Many wanted the Church to not only acknowledge the forced assimilation of Indigenous peoples into Christian society, but to also take accountability for their actions.
Now that we've heard the apology and saying I'm sorry is heartfelt. And I'm truly grateful for this moment to hear our Pope talking about the healing, the journey that we need to begin.
Time now for another short break, and when we come back, the month of August saw the long-awaited return of the CLE Family Fair. Welcome back. The month of August saw the long-awaited return of the Canadian Lakehead exhibition, and the fair attracted huge crowds following the 2-year COVID hiatus.
It was a much different sight over the past 5 days and nights, as big crowds flooded the fairgrounds with lines of people stretching down May Street onto Isabel Street. The classic rock concerts each night also drew several thousand people to the concert area. Organizers were originally worried whether the lingering effects of the pandemic might affect how many people would show up for the fair this year, but they ended up being blown away by the number of visitors who came out during the week.
Trying to get as close as possible, but we certainly broke the record. 74,000 is an estimate.
Also in August, City Police released details of another local homicide, but this one was much different than all the others.
Thunder Bay Police have laid manslaughter charges against 84-year-old Harriet Gray more than 2.5 months after an unidentified 91-year-old man died following an altercation inside the Bethany nursing home.
This is, in my experience, a unique investigation.
Inspector Jeremy Pearson says while criminal deaths inside seniors' homes aren't unheard of in Canada, he'd never been involved in such an investigation before. Pearson says while he can't go into detail about the incident, it was a fall that ultimately led to the victim's death.
There was an altercation between residents at the facility, resulting in a fall, which resulted in the ultimately in the death of our deceased.
City Police also laid murder charges in August, following an armed standoff with a wanted suspect.
Back on July 29th, police responded to a weapons call on McMillan Street and found 37-year-old Charlie Joseph Finlayson from Thunder Bay dead at the scene. City Police began treating it as a homicide and are now confirming that a firearm was used in the incident. Then, 13 days later, officers responded to reports of a disturbance on Blucher Avenue at Windsor Street, which led to a standoff involving several armed officers in body armor focusing on a residential building on the south side of the street. The standoff concluded at 8:45 p.m. and led to the arrest of 32-year-old Justin Randy Coaster of Thunder Bay. He's now been charged with second-degree murder in connection with Finlayson's death.
Also in August, Ken Boshkoff filed his nomination papers, seeking the mayor's chair, after Bill Morrow announced he wouldn't be running for a second term.
Boshkoff has an extensive history in politics, serving 2 terms as the city's mayor between 1997 and 2003, before making the jump to federal politics, serving 4 years as an MP. He also served 4 terms as a city councillor and ran for mayor in 2014, losing to incumbent Keith Hobbs by about 2,400 votes. Boshkoff explains more about his decision and what he would bring if he wins the position.
With my history of leadership in various organizations and a wide range of experiences and my belief in the community, I have the time and energy and health to do it, so I'm going to step forward, and I appreciate the encouragement from the community.
In September, the James Whalen tug was finally lifted out of the Kaministiquia River and relocated at a cost of $800,000.
The historic James Whalen tug has now been lifted onto a barge, with next steps being transporting it down the Cam River to the Patterson dock near the swing bridge. The lifting of the 117-year-old vessel on Thursday did come with a notable mishap, with a cable near the front of the boat snapping, sending it back into the river. Now that it is out of the water, Manager of Parks and Open Spaces Corey Halverson said the tumble didn't appear to cause any damage. While this was good news for the community, the initial damage assessment did reveal some issues.
There was some damage that was allowing a larger infiltration of water than we had seen in the past. And then today during the lift as well, you could visually see where it was leaking out from the base, the front of the hull. So it looked more like corrosion damage. We don't have a full assessment at this point, but it didn't look like any kind of physical damage from force. It would just look like essentially a hole.
There could be other damage to the vessel, but more will be known about its condition once it's on dry land. Halverson says that's the next move, with the prep work for transportation to Patterson Dock already happening.
In late September, a jury stayed after hours at the city courthouse to deliver a verdict in a shocking murder case involving an 11-year-old boy. He was stabbed to death, and his mother was charged in the killing. 37-year-old Courtney LaBelle was found guilty of second-degree murder, following an emotional 2-week trial. The Crown attorneys handling the case spoke outside the courthouse following the verdict.
This has been a difficult case. It's a very tragic situation and a difficult case to put forward. Some difficult evidence in particular. Some of the photographs and video that had to go in to evidence was difficult. Really appreciate the effort and attention that the jury played to the details. We asked them to come back with a finding of guilty of second-degree murder, and that's what they've done.
I would like to commend the officers of the Thunder Bay Police Service and the EMS paramedics and fire that responded on January 1st, 2020. It was evident in meeting with them and hearing their evidence on the stand that the loss of that young boy on January 1st, 2020 deeply impacted them, and I commend them for their efforts to render aid to him on that night.
LaBelle will learn her sentence this coming April. In late September, city police were investigating the city's 11th homicide of the year. First responders were called to the Andrus Court apartment complex on South Cumberland Street. The victim, a 28-year-old man from Ajax, was taken to hospital, where he was pronounced deceased. A 27-year-old Toronto man was eventually charged with the murder. Time for another short break. When we return, we'll recap the municipal election, which saw a lot of new faces heading to City Hall. The month of October began with yet another murder case. The shooting death in the downtown South Core was the city's record 12th homicide of the year.
Officers were initially dispatched to a weapons call after reports of gunfire in the May and Arthur Street area at around 4 o'clock Friday afternoon. The victim in the shooting, 24-year-old Michael Park from Toronto, was later pronounced dead at the regional hospital. 40-year-old Greg Casimir Mishake was arrested on Sunday and charged with first-degree murder. He appeared in court Monday morning and remains in custody. The Major Crimes Unit continues to investigate, and a second suspect was arrested Tuesday evening.
A 16-year-old was taken into custody by the Ontario Provincial Police in Blind River and has been charged with first-degree murder as well.
A long-awaited inquest began on October 11th. A total of 30 witnesses were to be called over 17 days regarding the deaths of 2 men in police custody.
44-year-old Don Mamakwa died in August of 2014, while 50-year-old Roland McKay died in July of 2017. Both men had been arrested on allegations of public intoxication and later died in their holding cells at the Thunder Bay Police Station when they lost vital signs related to medical illness. Under the Coroner's Act, this inquest is mandatory because the 2 men died while in police custody. The inquest jury will examine the circumstances surrounding the 2 deaths and make recommendations aimed at preventing similar tragedies.
A new mayor and council were elected on October 24th. Ken Boshkoff beat out 4 other candidates for the top job, including a strong challenge from Gary Mack.
And I'm going to commit myself, body and soul, for the next 4 years to make sure that this city becomes the city we always dreamed it could be.
After the last poll was finally tallied at around midnight, Boshkoff won the election with 13,538 votes, or 38% of the total, ending up nearly 1,400 votes ahead of Gary Mack. Peng Yu was in third with over 6,000 votes, followed by Clint Harris and Robert Sherpansky. Boshkoff says he was surprised of how close the race was at the end, but sees what he has to do now heading into his new role.
Well, it tells me that the people that I will need on my team have to be much more tech savvy in terms of communicating to a wider range of audiences on a wider range of platforms, and that takes some management, but we will do it, or I will make sure it's done.
I feel good about it. Disappointed maybe a little bit, but you know what? Who knows what's next? Something is on the horizon for me for sure. I have a very good feeling about that.
The 12-member council will feature 7 veterans and 5 new faces. The at-large winners were Mark Bentz, Shelby Chung, Trevor Gratuga, Rajni Argwal, and Casey Atrani. And the ward councillors are Andrew Folds in Current River, Kristen Oliver in Westfort, Albert Aiello in McIntyre, Brian Hamilton in McKellar, Dominic Pascalino in Northwood, Greg Johnson in the Nebin ward, and Michael Zacino in Red River. The outgoing City Council had their send-off in November, as 5 councillors received thanks from city officials.
An emotional evening at City Hall, as it was the last meeting for this term of council. Outgoing councillors were presented with a parting gift to commemorate their time serving the city. 6 on the council that have served the past 4 years will not be part of the newly elected council, including, of course, Bill Morrow, who decided not to seek the mayor's chair again, Peng Yu, who came 3rd in the race to fill that spot, and Cody Fraser, who also did not seek re-election. The other 3 of the 6 are council veterans that decided not to run again as well. That includes Brian McKinnon, Aldo Roberto, and Rebecca Johnson, all of which reflected on their time as city councilors.
To influence the fact that we have a age-friendly organization now. We have dog parks, we have drug strategy. Those are some of the things, but I think what's really important is the contribution I made to the community.
I've been blessed to be a councillor for 16 years. I love this city, and I'll continue to love it. I'll continue to support it. I'll continue to speak as proudly as I can about the city and its people.
You know what? We persevered, and we made some pretty good decisions all in all. And when I look back, I've been on 4 councils, and this was as good as any of them.
Also in November, the inquest wrapped up into the deaths of Don Mamaqua and Roland McKay while in police custody. The jury delivered 35 recommendations aimed at city police, the regional hospital, the Ministry of Health, Superior North EMS, and the Solicitor General. We spoke with the lawyers from both sides, including Asha James, who was surrounded by the families of McKay and Mamaqua.
I respect the jury and their hard work. They were at it a long time, and I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision for them. And regardless of what the verdict is, I think this inquest really shed a light on how much the systems failed both Don and Roland, and how much racism and bias and stereotyping played in their inability to get the help that they needed and deserved.
I think the jury did an amazing job. The recommendations speak for themselves. They clearly put in a lot of work and thought and dedication over the course of the last 4 weeks, and that's evident in the recommendations that they delivered.
There were 2 more murders in November. A 31-year-old man was killed at a home on Brent Street on November 1st, and city police later released surveillance images of the 3 potential suspects. And then, on November 18th, a 37-year-old man was found dead inside a home on Pearl Street. It was the 14th homicide of the year. 2 brothers aged 29 and 23 were charged with first-degree murder. School custodians and other CUPE members went on strike for 2 days in November before a deal was eventually reached with the province.
We're going back to the bargaining table and get a fair deal for everybody. Thanks, everybody.
It was a win in the eyes of CUPE Local 2486 members protesting out front of MPP Kevin Holland's office after the Ford government announced it would be repealing Bill 28. Many gathered around each other's phones to watch the big announcement, which will mean CUPE and the province will return to the bargaining table. In exchange for the repealing of Bill 28, CUPE has agreed to dissolve their strikes effective Tuesday. QP Local 2486's head steward Devin Clausen says this is an important step, but their work is not done.
No, it's great to see that they're rescinding the bill. Obviously, the amount of support and pressure that we put on this government worked. But again, this is a bill that should have never been passed in the first place. It is a road that the government didn't have to go down.
On November 28th, a new era at City Hall began as the recently elected mayor and council were officially sworn in.
Both new and experienced councillors all taking their oath of allegiance at the first official city council meeting of the new term. The gathering was mostly ceremonial with no decisions to be made on the agenda. It was a packed council chambers for the meeting, with many coming out to support friends or family on council, or just there to get a look at Thunder Bay's newest governing body. Of course, the meeting saw Mayor Ken Boshkoff provide his inaugural address, in which he spoke of the faith he has in the new council.
I am truly impressed with both the caliber and commitment of our newly elected council, as well as the wisdom and experience of our returnees. I will continuously seek your wisdom and input on the pressing matters before us. If there is anything we heard on the campaign trail, it is that our citizens believe in this city and want it to thrive.
Also during the meeting, in recognition of Thunder Bay being located on the traditional lands of Fort William First Nation, there was a smudge ceremony followed by a hand drum singer. Former Mayor Bill Morrow also attended the meeting, providing some words to the new council. Morrow stressed the importance of local government and the impact it can have on Thunder Bay.
I think it's one of the greatest gifts of being an individual councillor or part of municipal governance and not provincial or federal governments, is that you're not part of a political party. You're all here, at least in my perspective, as 13 individuals. And that is hugely important and a wonderful opportunity for you as you sit around this table, not being part of that political party.
Now that the councillors and mayor have been sworn in, the real work begins. Won't be long before consequential items, including the indoor turf facility and DTR, are on the agenda, not to mention budget season's right around the corner. Vasilios Bellows, TBT News.
December began with a pair of tragic collisions around Thunder Bay, which took the lives of 2 city residents. Police and other first responders were dispatched to Waterloo and Ridgeway Streets on December 1st, following a collision between a commercial vehicle and a pedestrian. The victim was a 57-year-old Thunder Bay man. The roadway was closed for about 6 hours while police investigated. And then on December 3rd, a snowplow collided with a tractor-trailer on Highway 102. The snowplow driver, a 52-year-old Thunder Bay man, was pronounced dead at the scene. Also in December, the local Alstom plant missed out on a massive $9 billion contract for the new Ontario Line subway project.
Our biggest concern is that we are losing key people in the plant. We're down to 150 people when actually in 2019 we were at 800 people. 200 people lost their recall rights this last month in November, and we have 22 people retiring. The machine shop only has 3 machines left. There were over 10 there before.
The contract awarded to Hitachi Rail includes $2.3 billion for new subway cars. Unifor says if the 25% Canadian content rule were adhered to, those vehicles could have been built by Alstom. An MTO spokesperson says the Ontario Line project will be built with 75% Canadian content, but the vehicle portion will only be 10%, according to Unifor. Alstom now has its hopes riding on a TTC contract for 480 subway cars, which Pascalino says is crucial to the plant's survival.
I can't see this plant surviving any further without a subway car bid of that magnitude. And we have to, even if Alstom does get the job, we have to ensure that the work is going to be done in Thunder Bay and in Canada.
The contract for those Toronto subway trains is expected to be awarded in December of next year. And now, as the new year arrives, local residents are hoping 2023 will finally see some progress from City Council and a reduction in homicides and overall crime in Thunder Bay. TBT News will continue bringing you the major news events in the year ahead. But for now, thanks for joining us for this recap of the top stories of 2022.